Welcome guys to Supreme Television, and we're going to be discussing PlanetSide 2 on PS4. We're going to talk about its graphics, resolution, frames per second, and the player count. First up, let's go ahead and say this. PlanetSide 2 will be ultra settings. Hell, it's already running ultra settings now on PS4. It is ultra settings now. That's out, okay? That's not changing. That's pretty much just there. They've already showed gameplay of it. It is ultra. Next up, resolution. This is a 100% guarantee and will not change. PlanetSide 2 will run 1080p. This is confirmed by SOE. And I also believe Sony Pure Entertainment will not allow SOE to go below 1080p. Because PlayStation thrives off that 1080p thing now. Like, ever since Xbox One has failed to hit 1080p multiple times, Sony kind of uses that to their advantage for advertising. So I feel like Sony Pure Entertainment does have their hands involved in that. Next up, next up, frames per second. I almost said resolution again, guys. But anyway, next up, frames per second. It'll be running, as of right now, it is running most of the time, about, I think, 95% of the time, is running 60 frames per second. That doesn't mean it's going to be running 60 frames per second. The problem is it's not because it can't hit 60 frames per second, and it's not because it can't stay 60 frames per second majority of the time. Majority of the time it does. But what's happening is, in large battles, that frame rate is dropping from 40 to 30 frames per second, and SOE don't want that in their game, which that's understandable. That's a huge noticeable difference. That's a noticeable drop. You will realize that very easily. They're still working on it. They're not confirmed. They haven't confirmed if it's going to be running 60 frames or 30 frames yet. But closed beta's coming up, open beta's coming up, and stuff like that. And I think during those stages of closed and open beta, I think they're going to be playing with the frames per second. They'll probably run 60 frames one time, 30 frames the next, and they'll probably go back and forth like that. And depending on players' experiences and what players, you know, tell SOE on the PlanetSide 2 closed beta or open beta forums during these beta periods will ultimately decide the ending factor for the frames per second. If players feel like, you know, this dropping a huge drop, then they'll probably keep it. They probably won't bother with it. But, you know, then SOE probably just don't want this drop to be noticeable whatsoever, even if the players ain't bothered by it. That's understandable. They don't want their game. They want their game to be solid and consistent. That makes sense. I mean, any company would want that. Well, some companies. And anyway, I mean, that's basically the whole frames per second thing. They may be able to keep it solid 60 frames per second in the end. If they do that, that will mind blow me even more. You know, it's mind blowing me now that it's mostly running 60 frames per second. It's just when it comes to huge battles, they can't keep it like that. So I mean, that's still crazy. Alrighty, next up, player count. And by the way, when I say player count, I'm not saying that the player count's going to be reduced. So no, player count is not being reduced or increased. For anybody out there who thinks it might be increased for some reason, you'll still have your 6,000 player servers, your 2,000 players per continent. And basically the way it works is, it's similar to draw distance. You know how in draw distance you can't see everything on the map. I mean, if you was playing like on a flat surface and you could look 2 miles down and see a tree far away, you know, 2 miles down for ultimately no reason, not using no scope or anything like that, just looking at it. It would look weird and plus not make no sense, and plus it even takes up more of the computer's resources or console's resources than it should have to. And ultimately that's basically what's happening here with PlanetSide 2. They're not dropping the player count, but let's say you're in a 2,000 man battle, you're only going to see 1,500 of it. And many of you are like, oh wow, that's going to ruin the experience now. We ain't going to have the full 2,000 people now. PC does this. PC has a happy medium for people with low PCs and high PCs. And I think it's about the same thing. Instead of seeing 2,000 people all at once, you're only going to see 1,500 at max. For any, depending on what, it don't matter what computer you have. And this is understandable as well. It's like draw distance. Plus, having 2,000 players on one area to begin with, it's kind of impossible to see that. Oh, you can't just sit there and count all of them. That would be insane. But, you know, you'll still have the 1,500. The other 500, you know, probably out in the distance, because the enemy players and the players that are, and the allied players that are closest to you are going to be the players you're going to see first, and then after that, it's just like draw distance. That's what it is, and many people on YouTube haven't really mentioned this. SOE announced it, and there's been websites that's misled people about it, saying the player count's been reduced, and that is not true whatsoever. The player count was not reduced. It's basically like draw distance. It's not going to affect the gameplay, the experience whatsoever, or it's not going to break the game whatsoever. So people that do know about this don't need to worry. And sites that are going around misleading people need to stop what they're saying, because they're not reducing the player count. It's just basically draw distance for players, which that makes sense. It's just what it is. But anyway, thanks for watching. I just want to make a short video about the graphical resolution, frames, and player count. And make sure you hit the like and fave button and subscribe to my channel for more future videos. And this is Seth signing off. Y'all take it easy now.